You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast. This is the show where you get the best tips, tricks, and nutritional hacks to help you and your family get healthier. You'll also hear what works and what doesn't work so you don't have to waste your time and money. All right, let's get started.
Hello, my name is Dr. Tony Martin Jr.
And I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctor Is In podcast, and this is episode 104. And on today's episode, we want to talk about a few things. Last week, we kind of covered a few different topics, and, we got a lot of emails this week again. We figured we'd cover a few different topics rather than just stick on one for the whole episode. Start off by talking about something that is a massive, massive problem and maybe honestly responsible for the significant rise in autoimmune disorders. And of course, I'm talking about vegetable oils or omega-6 fatty acids.
Yeah. We want to differentiate between omega-3 and omega-6 and why it's such a problem. And we always talk on our program, like we're always talking about insulin and inflammation. And this is part of the issue. We always talk about those crappy carbs, but there's also another poison in our diet because of the ratio that we have. And
let's talk about that ratio now. Ideally, in a perfect world, you would eat a ratio of 1-to-1, which of omega-3 and omega-6. So for every gram of omega-3 that you eat, you would eat a gram of omega-6. And that's a perfect ratio. That gets you the amount of omega-3 that you need, and it gets you the amount of omega-6 that you need. Mm-hmm. The problem today, because of processed foods and vegetable oils are mainly omega-6 fatty acids. We'll talk about the types of vegetable oils in a second, but because of the proliferation of processed foods, grocery store foods, everything you buy in a package has a vegetable oil in it, which is omega-6.
And there's a reason for that, right? It's a preservative in a sense. It glues the food together in a way, right?
Yeah, and it's why you can have something in a package for a long time. Yeah. It doesn't spoil. It doesn't go bad. I mean, we've all seen the pictures of the different meals that are out there that are like a year later and they haven't even really decomposed, right? Mm-hmm. That's the reality, is that a lot of these foods that we buy are loaded with omega-6s, which are vegetable oils. And as we mentioned, the ideal ratio would be 1-to-1. But research is showing, it's interesting. We wrote a newsletter last year talking about this, and the ratio back then was 17-to-1. So 17 times more omega-6 than omega-3. And what's it today?
Well, they're saying 25, 26-to-1 now? It's absolutely incredible that we're eating that much more omega-6 than we get in omega-3.
So it used to be, like I said, last year, I don't have the latest numbers this way, but they estimated the average person would eat around 70 pounds of vegetable oils a year.
Yeah.
So you always give the stat about sugar, how much the average person eats in a year.
Well, they were just showing again, it's around 160. Some stats are saying almost 180 pounds of sugar. Imagine that. 80 pounds of sugar a year. But at least 160 to 180, the average North American is consuming that much sugar a year. Because what we talk about in industrial, like vegetable oils, once they are heated up, are really industrial oils, right?
Well, the funny thing is, there's nothing natural about a vegetable oil.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just simply Google how they make, for example, canola oil, It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a highly refined, manufactured, you could put it in your car and run your car with it, oil, right? I mean, it really is. It's an industrial oil.
So we're talking about oils like canola oil, like we just mentioned, corn oil, soybean oil, of course, vegetable oil, peanut oils, sunflower oils, cottonseed.
Yeah.
What else is there? Grapeseed, margarine, those kind of things. Those are what's in everything. And as a result, we're eating 70-plus pounds of this a year. We're eating way more omega-6s than omega-3s. And this is causing a massive amount of inflammation in our body. Mm-hmm. And there are many who think that this is one of the big reasons why we are seeing so many more autoimmune disorders, because one of the problems that this causes is that the inflammation from these vegetable oils and the way they're digested leads to leaky gut syndrome. It actually irritates the lining of the bowel, makes it more permeable. It creates leaky gut. Now, we're building a program for leaky gut that we're really excited about, so we'll be sharing more about leaky gut in the future. But needless to say, a lot of these vegetable oils are contributing to leaky gut, and what happens is that you have a bunch of stuff now that's able to pass through the bowels into the bloodstream, and this is causing an autoimmune reaction for a lot of people. Yeah. One of the big things that we tell people that have an autoimmune disorder, everywhere from MS all the way down to rheumatoid arthritis, is to completely avoid vegetable oils.
Yeah.
And obviously consume a lot more omega-3 fatty acids. Yeah. In fact, I saw a study, and I wrote about it last year, where if people can bring the ratios down to almost even 4-to-1, it's amazing the health advantages and the things that go
how
away.
Much more anti-inflammatory that is, right?
Well, even there are a lot of people that are suffering from migraines and headaches as a result of all these vegetable oils, and when they can decrease the amount of vegetable oils they consume and increase the omega-3s, specifically we're big fans of DHA, then they see such an improvement in their symptoms simply from cutting out a lot of these processed vegetable oils as well. Now, we can't underestimate how big of an issue this is for people. A lot of times when people start to eat quote-unquote clean, when they start to cut back on processed food, a lot of the health benefits they experience right away is from actually eating a lot less of these really crappy oils, these highly processed oils. What's amazing, because when they make them, like I said, you got to Google it. It's amazing, right? They're heated. There's a lot of chemicals involved, a lot of pressure, a lot of heat.
So it's really denatured when you think of it, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is denatured. And there's not a lot of oil in vegetable. Like to make an oil from a vegetable, they got to work at it, right? They got to do a lot of things to do that. So it's one of those things. Now, there's an interesting, somebody put together an interesting chart or an interesting table where they looked at the opposing effects of omega-6 versus omega-3 fatty acids, specifically on obesity. What are the effects? So if you're eating a lot of omega-6, a lot of vegetable oils versus a lot of omega-3s, just show you a few of them. I found this quite interesting. Omega-6 promotes the increase in adipose cells, so it actually promotes the making of fat cells, where the omega-3s actually do the opposite. Also increases inflammation, whereas omega-3s, obviously, we use those in our clinic all the time to treat inflammatory conditions. Omega-6s will increase triglycerides, where omega-3s will lower triglycerides. Omega-6 will increase oxidation, so free radical damage, whereas omega-3s are actually protective in that area. Omega-3s will actually increase protein synthesis. And this is another thing I found really interesting, is the effect of omega-6. They actually shorten your telomeres, which is a great tool for determining anti-aging effect, right?
Yeah.
So
your telomeres in your cells, right? In your mitochondria.
Yeah, the longer they are, the healthier you are in a sense, right? So just a few more here. Omega-6 will promote increased leptin resistance, increased insulin resistance, and they will obviously increase your weight circumference, where omega-3s have the opposite effect of all that.
What are some of the examples of omega-6? That I know you gave the oils that are involved.
Yeah, but that's a big aspect. Like, that's by far the biggest source of omega-6 in our diets is processed food, and it has to do with a lot of these oils. A lot of people cook in these oils. They cook in vegetable oils, and because, again, they were really well marketed. It sounds healthy.
Yeah, vegetable oil.
Yeah, I mean, how vegetables are healthy. How
compared to butter? You know, one of the lies, right?
Well, and that's the problem.
When you were young, the biggest lie was you need to have margarine instead of butter, right? Because margarine's made from a vegetable oil.
And hence you're getting all these omegas. That's right. I mean, it's
plant sterols, they used to say, right? They were actually good for you. And then butter is bad for you because it's saturated fat, right? But, I mean, I used to say it back then, and now they're saying that the Martin Clinic is right, because we've always said that was nonsense. It was never true, right?
Yeah, butter, we've said this before, but it's worth repeating, is that the butter got blamed for the bread, right? Yeah. It wasn't the butter on the bread that was the problem. It was the bread on the butter.
Yeah.
But listen, What we're trying to tell you is this. One of the best things that you can do for your health is kind of decrease that ratio, right? Bring down the amount of omega-6 that you consume.
And up your omega-3.
And up your omega-3s.
You can't go wrong, folks, with upping omega-3. And the study where the statistic had come out of the 25, 26 to 1 was talking about just how the decrease in heart disease, the higher your omega-3 levels are, right? Like it's just directly proportional to the amount of omega-3 that you take. And it has to, the DHA, EPA, remember, these are animal fat. This is fish oil, right? The long-chain fatty acids are coming from the fish oil, and there's nothing better. It's so good for you, right?
It's funny because there's one of the shows that I liked was called Parks and Recreation, and there's a character on the show named Ron Swanson, and Ron's he's like a man's man in a sense, and it's funny because he's a big fan of bacon and steak and butter, and one of the sayings that he has about fish, I found it funny. He said, fish is the vegetable of meat. But there are a lot of people who simply do not get enough omega-3s in their diet, which, again, there are a few blood markers that are vital, right? We always say your blood levels of vitamin D3 crucial because they are tied to all-cause mortality. The lower your blood levels of vitamin D3 are, the more likely you are to die from something. And if you're sick, for example, this is October, this is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and this should be one of the slogans of the breast cancer. All the breast cancer awareness should be talking about vitamin D levels because it's been proven that when you have a higher level of vitamin D blood levels, you are less likely to die if you have cancer. So they should be working at bringing up the D level in people with breast cancer. They survive better. Right? Well, and now that we're on the topic, just real quickly, another interesting thing that studies have shown this to increase the survivability of breast cancer has to do with shortening your eating window. They found that when people are eating for less hours in a day, they are less likely to die from breast cancer, and it's less likely to come back. So very interesting, right? I mean, so there's a lot
That's that insulin, again, fueling the cancer, right?
Yeah, and that's, we'll do an episode on that because that's becoming more and more, accepted. We've been talking about cancer as a metabolic disease for a long time, and it's becoming more and more acceptable in terms of that belief, right? It used to be they want to pin it on genetics because then you can do research, you can isolate genes, you can work on drugs, and there's all these things you can do. Whereas if cancer is a metabolic disease of the mitochondria, it's a lot more complex, and there's other things there.
And they were showing, too, I just saw a study, and then I won't talk about it too much, but about how vitamin D works. Vitamin D, when your serum levels of vitamin D are high, I think in the area of around 40 to 50, and even higher than that, ng/mLs, right? If you're at that high level, they're showing that the vitamin D actually protects your cells from destruction of those free radicals and oxidative damage and the things that do so much damage in cancer in its reproductive state, right? So anyways, it's you're saying about vitamin D, and we've been talking about this so long.
This is another thing that I wanted to bring up because this is another study that was done. It was a clinical trial done showing that in diabetes, so type 2 diabetics, they found that somebody who's getting at least 4,000 international units, which is a lot higher than they recommend. We've written a newsletter on this, and we've done a previous podcast on this as well, but the way that they calculated the daily requirement for vitamin D is bad math. They made a mistake, and researchers have tried to get that corrected. They've written articles on it. It's just it's calculated too low. That's just a fact, right? But this clinical trial looked at 4,000 IUs a day in type 2 diabetics.
Which is the minimum, right?
Yeah, that's what we kind of recommend as a minimum for most people in our clinic. But what they found is that it actually decreased most of the blood markers for diabetics. So it decreased their insulin resistance. It decreased their HbA1c, which is a great indicator of insulin as well. So it just made them healthier. So again, we get a lot of emails in a week. And we get asked a lot of questions. Hey, what about this supplement? What about this nutrient? What about this thing? And one of the things we like to do is say, hey, those are good things, but are you doing the basic stuff, right? Are you getting enough vitamin D? Are you getting enough omega-3 fatty acids? Are you taking probiotics? You can't ignore the basics. You got to build that foundation, and then you can go from there. So I found that was an interesting study on vitamin D as well. And we got a few more minutes left in this podcast episode here. So let's talk about something that we found fascinating. It was an article that we read based on a study that we also read on how the brain, like we have always talked about how the dementias and Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and a lot of these things, for a lot of people, are diabetes of the brain.
Yeah.
How the brain is diabetic. It doesn't mean that the person's diabetic.
But their brain's diabetic.
But for all intents and purposes, the brain's diabetic. What I found interesting was they specifically talked about brain shrinkage. And
especially in the memory center, right?
Well, and that's the thing, right? As we age, our brain shrinks. That's normal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just part of aging. Our brain shrinks. You and I, we wrote an article this week on this. We have a saying that we like a lot, which is if you don't use it, you lose it, right? Which is a reason why it's amazing. Look at how they treat broken bones today compared to how they used to. People are walking on things a lot sooner. Right after surgery, they're up moving around, right? Because muscle wasting and all that is a real issue, and so if you don't use it, you lose it. Well, the same thing happens with our brain. If you don't use it, you lose it. So not only is our brain shrinking a little bit every year as we age, there's another issue that they're finding out, specifically in the hippocampus area, which is the memory center. Now, the brain is an energy hog. I mean, it requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot
You've got a big grid up there.
Yeah, it requires a lot of energy. This is why glucose is allowed to cross that blood-brain barrier and get into the cells of the brain. And specifically the hippocampus, which is our memory center, requires a lot of energy. So a lot of glucose going in there and everything's working the way it should.
Yeah.
However, when a person becomes insulin resistant, and we've talked a lot about insulin over the past, and when a person becomes insulin resistant, what they found is this, and this is fascinating. They found that glucose can still enter the cell, right? So it'll cross the blood-brain barrier, it goes into the brain, it'll go into the cells. However, insulin is required to process that glucose so that you can use it for energy or other things. When you have insulin resistance, the insulin can't get into the cells because the cells have become resistant. So you have high circulating insulin, but the insulin is not doing its job in the cells. So now you have the brain cells, and specifically the hippocampus area, it's full of glucose, but it can't do anything with it. So it's not working, which is why memory, which is one of the first areas that get affected from type 3 diabetes, which we say is diabetes of the brain, the memory starts to get affected. Specifically, they start to have short-term memory issues as well because they can't make new memories. The brain, that's one of the problems that happens. And then guess what happens? Because you're not using your hippocampus anymore, it starts to shrink. You don't use it, you lose it. So the brain, specifically the hippocampus, is shrinking even faster. So now you have age-related shrinkage. Then you also have shrinking of that area specifically because of insulin resistance.
And why would you have insulin resistance? Because you're consuming 100, you don't even see it. You're consuming 160 pounds of sugar a year. It's from in your yogurt to your breads to your noodles to your whatever, right? So, again, it's just showing why we see what we see, right?
And this is causing the next epidemic, which is going to be our bodies will outlive our brains. Now, the body will outlive the brain, but the body's going to break down because of glycation, right? Like the joints are going to break down and the muscles are going to, the tendons and everything, and all the effects of too much insulin resistance will break the body down, but it's going to outlive the brain. The hippocampus is going to shrink so much. The brain's going to shrink. And that's one of the signs of dementia and Alzheimer's is a smaller brain, right? And there are certain things already that we do that can shrink our brain faster. Insulin resistance is one of the worst things that happens because it shrinks the memory area.
Heavy metals?
Heavy metals for sure, but see, smoking was a major cause of brain shrinkage. Now, less people smoke.
Low levels of B12?
Low levels of B12 will shrink it. Low levels of omega-3.
Smoking, low levels of omega-3, yep.
And what they also found, because the brain is also majority fat and it needs a lot of DHA. It's its preferred source. So if you're not getting enough DHA, the brain, same thing, will shrink faster. And what they found is that, and this is interesting, right? Because they've always known that obesity, one of the signs of obesity is their brain is shrinking at a faster rate. They have a smaller brain. It's atrophying faster. And they always associated obesity with a shrinking brain. Now they're starting to understand why. It's because insulin resistance is a cause of obesity. So the problem itself is not the obesity. Rather, it's what's going on the inside, which is the insulin resistance. Yeah. So, again,
fascinating.
Yeah, it's just real interesting stuff again. So one of the best things that you can do for your health, just as we wrap up this episode, is eat less vegetable oils. Yeah, that will decrease the level of inflammation.
Stay away from the crackers.
Yeah, that will decrease the level of inflammation in your body.
Yeah.
Keep your insulin levels as low as possible. This will help your brain stay healthier. And get enough vitamin D. Yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the summary of this podcast.
Yeah, and make sure you're getting enough omega-3, the DHA oil.
Yeah, enough DHA, enough vitamin D3, and keep your insulin low. It'll take care of a lot of the big issues that you see every day. Mm-hmm. So again, we want to thank you for joining us on this episode. If you have any questions, you can email us at info@martinclinic.com. If you are not getting our newsletters, we talk about a lot of these things. You can do that by heading over to our website, martinclinic.com, and just signing up for our newsletters. You can also hit us up on Facebook as well. And again, we do want to thank you for listening to this. And if you haven't left us a review yet, in iTunes, it takes a second. Just go leave us a quick review. That will really help us out as well a lot, and we would appreciate that. So again, thank you for listening.